It happens in a moment so ordinary that most people hardly think about it. You're driving home after a long day, maybe from work, maybe from a friend's house, maybe from dinner across town. The road feels calm and routine. Streetlights pass across the windshield one by one, and for a moment, your mind is somewhere else entirely. Then suddenly, in your rearview mirror, you see them, flashing red and blue lights. In that instant, something changes inside your body. Your hands tighten on the steering wheel. Your attention sharpens. Your heart rate lifts slightly. It doesn't matter if you've done nothing wrong. The presence of law enforcement behind you activates something deeply human: uncertainty. You slow down. You pull over. The car stops. The engine hums quietly, and now you're waiting. A police officer steps out of the patrol car and begins walking toward your window. For millions of drivers across the United States, this exact moment happens every day. Traffic stops are one of the most common interactions between citizens and law enforcement. Every year, millions of drivers are pulled over for routine reasons: speeding, broken taillights, expired tags, lane violations, and other minor traffic issues. But what happens next can shape the entire encounter. And very often, it begins with a question that sounds harmless. Where are you coming from? On the surface, it sounds like small talk, something a coworker or neighbor might ask. But inside the context of a police stop, that simple question can carry more significance than many drivers realize. Which raises an important question. If a police officer pulls you over and asks where you're coming from, what are you actually required to say? Think about that for a moment. If it happened tonight, what would your instinctive response be? Would you explain your whole evening? Would you answer automatically without thinking? Would you remain silent? Or would you politely decline? Many drivers don't actually know where the legal boundaries of these conversations lie, and misunderstanding those boundaries can sometimes create unnecessary complications during a stop. To understand why that question matters, we first need to understand what a traffic stop legally is. In the eyes of the law, a traffic stop is not simply a casual conversation on the side of the road. It is considered a temporary detention. The United States Supreme Court has repeatedly described traffic stops as a form of limited seizure under the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment protects people from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. That protection applies not only inside homes, but also during interactions between police officers and individuals in public, including traffic stops. When an officer activates their lights and signals a driver to pull over, the driver is no longer free to simply drive away. For that moment in time, the law recognizes that the driver has been detained for investigative purposes. But this detention has limits. Police officers are allowed to stop drivers when they have reasonable suspicion that a traffic violation or other legal issue has occurred. Once the vehicle is stopped, officers are allowed to request certain information related to operating the vehicle. Typically, that includes a driver's license, vehicle registration, and proof of insurance. These requests are not optional. Drivers are legally required to provide identification and documentation showing they are authorized to drive. Beyond those basic requirements, however, the situation becomes more nuanced. During many stops, officers begin asking additional questions. Some questions relate directly to the reason for the stop. Others do not. For example, do you know why I stopped you? Where are you headed tonight? Where are you coming from? Have you had anything to drink tonight? To many drivers, these questions feel like normal conversation. Sometimes they are simply part of routine interaction. But from a legal perspective, they also serve another purpose: investigative questioning. Law enforcement officers are trained to observe behavior, evaluate responses, and gather information that may indicate whether further investigation is necessary. Sometimes questions are used to confirm a driver's story. Sometimes they help detect inconsistencies. Sometimes they are simply used to observe how someone reacts under pressure. None of that automatically means the driver has done anything wrong, but it does mean that every answer becomes part of the interaction. This is where many legal experts emphasize something most drivers rarely consider: the difference between what you must say and what you choose to say. Legally, drivers must provide identifying information and comply with lawful instructions related to the stop. But when it comes to conversational questions, especially those unrelated to the traffic violation, the law often gives drivers more discretion than they realize. This brings us back to the question that inspired this entire discussion. Where are you coming from? It sounds harmless, but depending on the situation, the answer can create complications drivers never intended. Imagine a simple example. A driver is pulled over for a broken taillight. The officer walks up and asks where the driver is coming from. The driver casually replies, "I just left a bar downtown." That statement alone does not mean the driver committed a crime. Plenty of people visit bars without drinking alcohol, but that answer may lead to follow-up questions. Did you have anything to drink tonight? How many drinks? How long ago was your last drink? Now the interaction has expanded beyond the original traffic violation. Defense attorneys often point out that many legal cases begin with small pieces of voluntary information offered during roadside conversations. Sometimes drivers speak casually without realizing how their words might be interpreted. Sometimes they answer simply because silence feels uncomfortable. But understanding the structure of a stop can help drivers navigate these situations more confidently. This is where the famous one-sentence response enters the conversation. Many lawyers suggest that if an officer asks questions unrelated to the reason for the stop, such as where you are coming from, a calm and respectful response can help maintain your rights without escalating tension. The key word is respectful. The goal is not to argue with the officer or refuse cooperation aggressively. In fact, maintaining a calm and polite tone is one of the most important factors in any traffic stop. Officers deal with unpredictable situations every day. They are trained to assess tone, behavior, and body language. Hostile responses rarely improve the outcome of a roadside interaction. But there is a difference between being respectful and volunteering unnecessary information. Legal experts often explain that drivers have the right to decline certain questions politely. One commonly suggested response is simple. "I'm sorry, officer, but I prefer not to answer any questions." Notice how calm and neutral that sentence is. It does not accuse the officer of wrongdoing. It does not challenge authority. It does not escalate the situation. Instead, it establishes a boundary. In many situations, that single sentence is enough to clarify the driver's position. It's important to understand that laws can vary slightly between states. In some jurisdictions, individuals may be required to provide their name during certain encounters under stop and identify statutes. However, during a standard traffic stop, presenting a driver's license typically satisfies the identification requirement. Beyond that, questions about travel plans or personal activities often fall into voluntary conversation. This is why many attorneys emphasize the concept of controlled communication during police encounters. You provide what the law requires. You remain respectful, but you avoid expanding the conversation unnecessarily. Understanding these principles also requires looking at the legal history behind them. For decades, courts have tried to balance effective law enforcement with individual constitutional rights. Cases such as Terry v. Ohio helped establish the concept of reasonable suspicion for investigative stops. Later decisions further clarified what officers can and cannot do during traffic stops. One especially important case was Rodriguez v. United States in 2015. In that case, the Supreme Court ruled that police officers cannot extend a traffic stop longer than necessary to address the reason for the stop unless they develop additional reasonable suspicion. In other words, once the traffic matter has been handled, officers generally cannot prolong the stop simply to investigate unrelated issues. This ruling reinforced a key principle. Traffic stops must remain limited in scope unless new circumstances arise. Understanding this legal framework helps explain why conversations during a stop can sometimes matter more than drivers expect. Every question and every answer exists within that structure. There is also another factor involved: human psychology. Police officers receive training not only in law but also in behavioral observation. They are taught to notice changes in tone, hesitation, nervous body language, and inconsistencies in responses. Many of these cues may be completely innocent. Most people feel nervous when interacting with law enforcement, but those observations can still influence how an officer evaluates the situation. This is one reason why simple communication is often recommended. Short answers, calm tone, no unnecessary elaboration. Because once a conversation becomes complicated, misunderstandings can occur. Think about everyday life for a moment. Have you ever said something casually that later came across differently than you intended? Now imagine that kind of miscommunication happening on the side of a dark road, under flashing lights, with adrenaline running through your body. The environment itself changes how people communicate. That is why many legal educators emphasize preparation long before a traffic stop ever happens. Understanding your rights does not mean preparing for confrontation. In many ways, it means the opposite. It means being able to handle the interaction calmly, confidently, and respectfully, without unnecessary stress. And sometimes all it takes is understanding one simple sentence. I prefer not to answer any questions. Imagine the officer standing beside your window. Red and blue lights reflect inside the car. The officer greets you calmly. Good evening? The interaction follows a familiar pattern. Do you know why I stopped you? Or perhaps something direct. Your brake light is out. Then comes the routine request. May I see your license, registration, and proof of insurance? Drivers are expected to comply. Providing documentation is part of the legal responsibility that comes with operating a vehicle. But the conversation often continues. Where are you headed? Where are you coming from? Did you know the speed limit here? These questions may feel casual, but officers are observing responses carefully. They listen to tone of voice and watch body language. From their perspective, information is being gathered continuously. This is why many legal experts emphasize something simple but important. During a traffic stop, every word becomes part of the interaction. Many drivers answer questions automatically. I just left dinner with friends. I was at the gym. I'm coming from work. Often these answers cause no issues, but sometimes they lead to additional questioning. A driver who says they just left a bar may immediately be asked about alcohol consumption. Again, this does not mean wrongdoing, but the direction of the stop can change. And that illustrates a key point. Every answer can lead to another question. Most traffic stops end quickly with a warning or citation, but understanding how these conversations unfold helps drivers navigate them more confidently. Human psychology also plays a role. When people feel stress, they often speak faster, provide extra information, or answer questions they were not asked. Psychologists describe this as cognitive overload, the brain trying to process multiple signals at once. Flashing lights, authority figures, uncertainty, adrenaline. Under these conditions, many people become overly cooperative simply to reduce tension. Ironically, that instinct can sometimes complicate the situation. This is why legal educators emphasize controlled communication. Provide required information. Remain respectful. Avoid unnecessary conversation. Traffic stops are temporary investigative encounters governed by legal rules. Arguing roadside rarely changes the outcome of a citation. Courts exist to resolve those disputes later. But roadside communication can influence how long a stop lasts and how complicated it becomes. Drivers who understand the structure of a stop often feel less pressure to fill silence with conversation. They know what they must provide. They know what is optional, and they understand that sometimes the most powerful response is the simplest one. I'm sorry, officer, but I prefer not to answer any questions. Because in many cases, the direction of a traffic stop is shaped less by the original violation and more by the conversation that follows. And once drivers understand that, the flashing lights in the rearview mirror become far less mysterious. Knowledge replaces uncertainty, and the interaction becomes something manageable through calm communication, preparation, and an understanding of the law.